You are now live, Chair.
Right, thank you. Welcome to the February meeting of the Audit Committee of Charnwood Borough Council. Would you please note the virtual meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Council's website following the meeting. Under the openness of local government bodies regulations, people may film or record this meeting, and this is outside the Council's control. However, people wishing to film or record the meeting should do so in a way that does not disrupt the business of the meeting. Also, so that the meeting is not disturbed, could I ask everyone present to please turn off mobile phones or switch them to silent and ensure that your environment is distraction-free. In particular, please turn off smart speakers, Alexa, Siri, Cortana, etc., as these record conversations, and this could be a breach of the GPDR. As this is a virtual meeting, it will run slightly differently. Members will need to introduce themselves and state their names and confirm that they can see and hear proceedings. This is important for the purposes of recording attendance and transparency in the meeting. I'll do this by undertaking an alphabetical roll call. Members will use the raise hand feature in the participants section of Zoom software if they wish to speak, and will be allowed to do so in a queue system. Right, could I ask each member to confirm verbally that they're present and that they can see and hear the proceedings? Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. I confirm that I can see and hear the proceedings.
Councillor Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Simon Bradshaw, I can see and hear the proceedings.
Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Mark Charles, I can confirm that I can see and hear the proceedings. Thank you.
Councillor Baldwin.
Thank you, Chair. I can hear and see the proceedings.
Councillor Parsons.
Yes, I can confirm I can both see and hear proceedings. Thank you, Chair.
And finally, Councillor Taylor.
Good evening. Yes, I can see and hear proceedings.
Could I now ask the officers that are present to confirm verbally that they're present and that they can see and hear the proceedings? I don't see Victoria Gittins from Mazars. Do we know whether they're coming?
Well, apologies there, Chair.
I can see you now, thank you. Can you hear me and see me, Mark?
Yes, Chair, I can hear and see you, but Victoria won't be joining us this evening.
That's okay. Not surprised, it's quite a foul night, really. Right, Adrian Ward.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear proceedings.
Leslie Tansey.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Simon Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear proceedings.
Justin Henry.
Thank you, Chair. I can both see and hear proceedings.
Lisa Maron. You're on
Thank
mute.
you, Chair. I can see and hear proceedings.
Tracy Hayes.
Tracy won't be attending this meeting.
That's okay. Thank you. Kerry Beavis. No.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Nikki Conway.
Thank you, Chair. I can both see and hear the proceedings.
And Ed Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear the proceedings.
In that case, we'll move on to the agenda. The first item is apologies for absence, and I understand none have been received. So we'll move on to the second item, minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 22nd of December 2020. I'll ask all councillors present now to confirm verbally that they're content to receive and note the minutes. Firstly, Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy with the minutes.
Councillor Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to receive and note the minutes.
Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to note the minutes.
Councillor Baldwin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to note the minutes.
Councillor Parsons.
Yes, happy to note, Chair.
And finally, Councillor Taylor.
Yes, happy to note, Chair.
So in that case, we can note the minutes or approve the minutes for my signature later on. Thank you. Right, the next item is disclosure of pecuniary and personal interests. Does anybody have an interest that requires them to leave the meeting? I'll go through a roll call, shall I? Councillor Bolton?
Nothing to declare, Chair.
Councillor Baldwin?
Nothing to declare, Chair.
Councillor Charles?
Nothing to declare, Chair.
Councillor Bradshaw?
Nothing to declare, thank you.
Councillor Parsons?
Nothing to declare, Chair.
And Councillor Taylor?
Nothing to declare, Chair.
Right, item 4 is questions under committee procedures rule 12.8, and understand no questions have been received. So we'll move on to item 5 of the agenda, which is the annual audit letter. We have, can't see him now, he's gone. Mark from Mazars to go through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Would you like to take us through the report, please, Mark?
Certainly. I'm going to talk to you from section 1 of our report, which is page 10 of my agenda pack, which gives you an update on the audit completion for the 2019-20 external audit. In a previous meeting, you would have received, if you recall, members, our audit completion report, which set out all the detailed findings of the audit. And what we are now in a position to do is close all of those residual items out so that we are in a place in order to issue the conclusion. If you recall, the audit was delayed as a result of the assurances that we required from the pension fund auditor not being received in time, and therefore we were unable to issue our and complete our procedures. And therefore the financial statements of the published and audited financial statements did not meet the deadline of the 30th of November. What I can now say is that obviously all of that work is now fully complete. There are no new matters arising. The status of the audit, the only residual aspect outstanding is merely for me to complete this report to you, which takes us fully up to date in terms of post-balance sheet events and residual quality control procedures. I will take the rest of the report as read, and I am more than happy to take any questions. The only comment I need to reaffirm at this point is that at the point of issuing our opinion, I can confirm that we are and continue to be independent and maintain an objective state of mind in issuing our conclusion. And finally, I think, whilst I said this last time, I make no apologies for repeating it. You cannot underestimate the amount of time and effort that the finance team have been under and the challenges in getting to this point. And I do want to express our thanks on behalf of my team and myself to the finance team for being very helpful, supportive and cooperative throughout the entire process.
Thank you. Does anyone present have any questions to ask?
Through you, Chair.
I see Councillor Bolton.
Yeah,
Councillor Bolton and then Councillor Parsons.
I just have a very quick question, Mark, please. On page 14 of the agenda pack, under fees for other work, we state we confirm that we've not undertaken any non-audit services for the council in the year, and yet in the table above there's £13,100 that is separated out from the audit fee. Could you just explain that to me, please?
Certainly, a peculiarity in audit speak per se. Non-audit services would be classed as advisory type work. The assurance work we do on housing benefits and pooling of housing capital receipts are called audit related services, and therefore whilst they're not directly related to the statutory audit, they don't count as non-audit services and therefore impinge our independence in any way. And that would be the main distinction I would draw for you between audit and non-audit services.
That's great, thank you.
Councillor Parsons.
Thank you, Chair. Interestingly, my first question was on page 14, but slightly different. And I'm please, Mr. Surridge, I'm not moaning about the level of fees. I'm just requesting when we do something like the additional fees for housing benefit and the pooling of housing capital receipts and the extra bits and pieces, are they at our request, or are they extra fees that are identified during the process of the external audit and you recommend it to us that we should?
So for clarity, what I'm happy to do is just talk you through those aspects. So that there's two there. At the bottom half of the table, you have the assurance related services around housing benefits and pooling of housing capital receipts. That work is independently appointed by the local authority through a separate terms of engagement, and therefore, in theory, you could appoint a separate organisation to do that work. But it is right that we disclose that. The items above, I'm more than happy to, I will start by saying those items above, the fee variations, are not distinct to Charnwood in any way in terms of they are a reflection of the wider market and the onset of COVID. And therefore, traditionally when additional audit fees come about, they usually come about as a result of errors or particularities with an organisation. And therefore, at this point, I'll confirm that they are not isolated to Charnwood.
Thank you for that. That's fine. The second point is just to understand, really. On page 18, the emphasis of matter point, is note X means that we didn't have the appropriate number. I just want to query what the note X means, because I then couldn't cross-reference it when I was reading through it.
That is just at a point in time. We wanted to make, at a point we issued this, we weren't 100% certain which note it was going to be. I think it's either note 2 or 3. So it's the previous reference to COVID in the narrative. Yeah,
okay.
The note, the final version will have the correct note reference in there.
Okay, that's fine. No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Could I just ask Simon, is there something I need to sign now as an audit letter?
It was, to be honest, it's something I was going to clarify with Mark. So I think we've got all the ducks in a row. We just need to arrange the logistics. So myself and yourself may well need to get together, but it's something we need to sort out with Mark. So I'm not quite sure how we're going to do it, but we'll have to work out that in some way or other. But hopefully we're now on a point of being able to sign it. I know Mark's been working up pretty much to today to sort all this stuff out. So hopefully we'll be doing that in the near future.
Thanks. We'll meet up. Well, we'll get together somehow and decide how this is done. Are there any other questions on this item? I don't see any more hands raised.
Thank you, Chair. Just one point. On page 23, I note the final paragraph, which comments that the main highlight of the Redmond review was that fees are not sufficient to meet the work required. And they've published your account. With regard to how long are we inside this fee arrangement that we've got now from this pooled situation with the auditors?
I'm going to come back and clarify for you on that one, if I may. I believe the current contract round runs for 5 years, which would take you through to 2022-23, but could be extended for another 2 years on top of that. But if you like, I can come back and clarify that point.
No, that's fine. If it's just approximate, I knew we were inside, but I wasn't quite sure what the length of term was in terms of that, whether it was something just this year or whether we had 5 years to run, etc. But that's indicative. So that's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jeff.
Well, thank Mark for the work that he's put in and his team for producing the report. I'd say it's encouraging as well. Nikki, do we need to note this or any formal approval? I don't see a recommendation.
I'm going to defer to my colleague Ed on that because he's been managing the agenda. Thank you.
Right then, Ed, what is your opinion?
There isn't anything to note. There isn't a cover report, but I guess it can't hurt for the committee to note it.
I guess if we don't note it, there's no record we've even seen it, is there?
Yeah, so I'd I'd suggest noting it just so you can say you've so the committee have considered it. So yeah, I'd say to note it.
Yeah. Councillor Bolton, are you prepared to note the report?
Thank you, Chair. Happy to note the report.
Councillor Baldwin?
I'm happy to note the report, Chair.
Councillor Bradshaw?
Thank you, Chair. I'm also happy to note the report.
Councillor Charles?
Yes, happy to note the report, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Parsons?
Yes, happy to note, Chair.
And Councillor Taylor?
Yes, Chair, happy to note.
Okay, thank you. Right, we'll move on to item 6, which is the capital strategy, including the Treasury Management Strategy. Would you like to introduce it, Leslie, or will Simon be speaking? Simon, are you going to introduce the report?
Yes, if I may just introduce it briefly, Chair, and then it was a bit of a joint effort, so depends if there are any questions, either myself or Leslie will probably be best placed to answer them. So if just on the report, so the first, so just the draft cabinet report, which we're commenting on. This report recommends the approval of the capital strategy and the associated Treasury management statement to Council, but what this meeting has a specific role within the governance and within the approval of this document. So so there are two opportunities at the end, really. One is to note the report, and at that point that will suggest the committee is happy for it to go to Council without any further comment, or if there are comments that the committee would like to make to Council, I think the answer would be to agree and record those, and then I'd have to probably defer to my Democratic Services or Monitoring Officer colleagues, but they would then be referred and noted to Council, so Council would be informed of the conclusions of the Audit Committee. As the timing works this year, actually, the Audit Committee is before the Cabinet meeting, so the Cabinet meetings coming up to discuss these in a week or so. So in reality and for practical purposes, any concerns could also be relayed to Cabinet as well. So hopefully that just explains what this item is about. In terms of just talking through it and introducing it briefly, if I sort of go to part B of the draft cabinet report, and then there's a section called salient features, and the key points here are really the strategy is very much the same as the previous year, with the exception of the withdrawal of the commercial investment property element of that strategy due to changes in the regulations covering access to the Public Works Loan Board. So what we're saying within this strategy is that we will not be purchasing commercial property in financial year 21-22. It may be that we wish to reconsider that, and for future years we may well do that, but at the moment it appears difficult. So for clarity and to make sure we're on the right side of any regulation, this strategy states that we will not be investing in commercial property in the financial year 21-22. As I say, it may be that having reviewed various options and taken some professional advice, we may wish to change our mind, but if we did, then that would obviously be subject to a revised version of this strategy and another report to Cabinet and then Council. So all members would get to see that. But at the moment, what we're stating is that there's no commercial property investment in years 21, 22. Other than that, everything else is pretty much the same. So we did make some changes to the capital strategy for the 2021 financial years, but having reviewed it, we believe that those elements, and also within the Treasury management statement, those changes we made are still valid and relevant going forward. So we've not sought or felt the need to make any other changes going forward. The only other thing I might draw your attention to, so I've in the little red numbering system on the right hand side of the sort of body of the report on page, I think it's page 12 of 18, there is a, let's see if we get there. I've gone too far. Sorry, I'm scooting through on my tablet here. Oh yes, on page 12 of 18, going on to 13 of 18, obviously we have made some commercial property purchases, and without going, and I think we've more chance to go through some of the detail of this when we get to the exempt item at the end, which Justin will be able to talk the committee through. But it just summarises the portfolio we have. So the first table shows £22.5 million worth of purchases, annual rent, which are actually all in thousands, but the gross annual rent is approaching 1.5 million, so that number of 1466. And then the table below shows how that gross rent translates into projected revenue for our budget going forward. So 21, 22, that is actually the budget. So we get gross rents of 1.466 million. There's an MRP charge. So just to demonstrate, we are setting MRP aside in line with our policy. So you can see a number of 286. There is an internal interest charge because at the moment we haven't actually had to externalise any borrowing. So that is a notional rate based that relates to the interest foregone by paying for the properties out of our existing cash balances. We've allowed £50,000 for portfolio management going forward, and then we're actually also creating a reserve. So in 21-22, you can see that we're proposing that an amount of 367,000 would be put into a reserve, and that will allow for void periods, dilapidations, potentially also if we need to externalize debt in the future. So, and again, Justin will probably talk more about that in future, but you can see that we're actually putting quite a substantial amount aside, or we're planning to going forward. And then that leaves a net contribution to our revenue budget of £650,000. So I thought members would be interested to see that, and I thought that would be a helpful thing to put in the strategy. As I say, Justin's going to go through that in more detail later, but I just felt it was important to point that out. So I'm going to stop there, and if there are any questions for either on the sort of first bit of the report, I'll attempt to answer them, and if it's on the Treasury management, it's probably more likely Leslie will be able to give a better answer. So thank you for that.
I see the first question is from Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, Simon's just caught me on the hop. I don't know what section my bit's from. I've just got the page number, so I'm just going to fly the questions out, and you can decide who you want to answer them. Just the first one is on page 38 of the agenda pack, page 8 of the other bit, just about the changes in how much we're going to be borrowing. So obviously it's mentioned there that it's highly likely we're going to make a change from what we normally do and borrow a lot. And I suppose that relates to my questions on page 54 and 55 about the external borrowing in 2021 is 47,400,000. Is that right, what I'm reading there on that bottom table of that page?
Yes, I haven't got to it, but those numbers do sound familiar, yes.
Right, so I suppose, is that relating to what's in the previous table of what our budget was compared to our actual spend? So is that the reason why we haven't borrowed at the moment? Is that right, my understanding?
So this is quite complicated, but basically if it's not, if an acquisition is not funded from reserves, and this sounds very odd, but if we can either fund something by allocating an earmarked reserve to it, either a usable capital receipt or some revenue, or we can do it out of sort of revenue contributions from within the in-year revenue budget. So if we do that, that counts as being funded, and we don't have to borrow. If we don't fund it from reserves, it is then assumed we're borrowing to finance that asset. That's how it works. I'm probably simplifying it slightly, believe it or not, but that's broadly how it works. So therefore, the table of 47 million shows that we're borrowing. But what we've done with commercial property, although we're borrowing the money, we've borrowed it from ourselves because we have a lot of cash balances, and that's just the way the cash flows work to a large extent within local government. So what we've done is it counts as borrowing, but we've not had to borrow the money because we've got it in our own bank account. So, don't know if that answers the question.
Sort of, yeah. But does that mean that we're not going to borrow any money this financial year then?
It means if we, well, it's unlikely. It depends on whether we have opportunities to fund the enterprise zone or fund or invest in regeneration as set out in the strategy and is also in the capital plan. So those two items between them are around, I think one's a 15 million, I think they're both a 15 million. So if we were to do something substantial that total around about 30 million, then we would be borrowing, which is what the capital strategy says. And with those amounts of money, we would be almost certainly borrowing externally. So we would be going to the Public Works Loan Board or to another source of funder to actually get that cash. If those opportunities don't come to pass, then it's likely that we probably wouldn't have to go to the external market. We will be able to maintain an internally borrowed position with the existing cash balances that we have.
Okay, thank you. And would that go back to Cabinet for a report then? Is that how it would operate if those opportunities arise or not?
Yes, so that's what the strategy says. So if we have the opportunity to, well, there was a forward funding arrangement with the enterprise zone for an initial 2 million, as it turns out. So that was a Cabinet report back in October. If something similar happens with the Science and Enterprise Park, that will come to Cabinet. If there's some significant regeneration opportunity, then that will come to Cabinet. So though it's in the capital plan and in the capital strategy, you would expect to see that coming forward at Cabinet as well.
Okay, thank you. Just one final question, if I may. On page 55, in the second paragraph, it just mentions approval by council on the 9th of November 2020. So is that a wrong date? Because it says which is subject to approval. So that needs altering.
It does. So apologies for that. That's okay. On, sorry, which page is that on?
It's page 55 of the report, page 6, small 6. So it's a second paragraph. So it's obviously just a copied and paste, just needs altering
It is. That's apologies. That was missed. So I'll hold my hands up to that one. But it is, the date should be the date of the council. So it should be the 21st or 22nd of February.
Right. Okay.
So apologies for that.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
I see Councillor Parsons has got his hand raised. Councillor Parsons.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've just got a couple of questions on the first part. If I can just deal.
I can't hear you.
Apologies, I was just using the instant mute. I've gone to the main one now, so I don't have to keep my finger on the space bar. If I could just deal with the capital strategy piece first. I am slightly nervous about the removal of the investment in commercial property strategic references. I believe it was made clear to me in other meetings that whilst the SIPFA code has prevented us now borrowing for commercial property to support revenue, it was made clear to me in other meetings that the potential was still there for us to borrow in other sources. and that we had that choice. Given that we have that choice, and I believe that was made clear to me in other meetings, I'm uncomfortable with the fact we've removed all the criteria in last year's investment strategy for commercial property. So we've done a whole range of work around that the yield must be 7%, 3.5%, all of that's gone in this document. And I'm nervous that we could now choose to rewrite all of that, having worked hard and provided a strategic framework previously. All the measurements of that strategic framework have been removed in this document. I'm guessing, being nice because of the situation with SITFA, so we're just saying we're not going to do that anymore. But I believe I specifically asked in previous meetings whether we might still do this in commercial property. I think the answer was very clear to me that we could still do this, borrowing from other sources if we felt it was relevant. I am now therefore uncomfortable that we've removed all the criteria for investing in commercial property now. That's my first point.
Okay. So the answer is, rather than leave those criteria in for clarity, when as the report was written, it was decided to remove all reference to commercial property because there are no plans to participate. If we wanted to reinstate investment in commercial property, it would have to come back through this route. So it would have to come back through audit committee and cabinet and then council again. So that's what would happen. Since probably the last time we spoke, things have moved on a little bit, and I can't quite remember the timings, but in the autumn statement, so this previous comments related to the PWLB loan board and access to that funding. So although we may not have been able to access PWLB loans, other sources of finance were available. And so investment in commercial property remained possible. What's happened now is the government have released, in conjunction with SITFA, a consultation on commercial property, and basically that says you're now not allowed to do it. So things have moved on from making it difficult to access finance to a situation which is not quite extant now, but at some point when the new prudential code is introduced, we will not be allowed to invest in commercial property. So it's highly unlikely that we as a council will be able to invest in commercial property. There is a consultation on this, and the consultation wording...
Is that from any source of borrowing or only from PW Loan Board?
It's nothing to do with borrowing, it just says we can't do it. So we're not allowed to invest in commercial property. It's not to do with borrowing, it's basically we're not allowed to invest in commercial property for yield purposes. So
it hasn't happened yet.
It's not happened yet.
And it may not.
The consultation offers us two choices. Basically, do you like the wording telling us you can't do it, or would you like some other wording telling us we can't do it? So that's the level of choice. So although it's not happened, it's a certainty that it will happen. It's just a question of timing. So for us to get round that and consider investing in commercial property again, I hesitate to say it's impossible, but for us to do it, it will probably require some other corporate vehicle and some other arrangements to enable us to do it. And I have to say, until we get the final version and probably get council advice, if we wanted to go down that route, it's not really a viable option going forward. So we can obviously update committee as we go along, but from where I sit now, it's highly unlikely that the council is going to be investing in commercial investment property due to what I've seen come through on the commercial code. So I think the decision to not invest in commercial property was one we would have made anyway, but it's certainly reinforced by what's come out of the Prudential Code consultation.
So, before you move on, Councillor Parsons, I just want to point out that Justin Henry has his hand up, so I'm not sure whether he wants to contribute to this point.
Justin?
Thanks, Nikki. Just as a point of clarification for councillors, neither the code changes nor the access to the Debt Management Office or the PWLB preclude regeneration-based investment within the borough. And regeneration investment within the borough can still generate a yield. It's primarily debt-free yield activities, where the only purpose is strictly generating a return. So that's a very clear distinction. Regeneration within the borough is still involved, and return can still be generated in that respect.
That's quite interesting because that kind of bumps into the next point, but I kind of get that because I note. Let me deal with that first point first. I get the fact that it's unlikely to happen, but I've also been in meetings where the level of borrowing that we're going to now was also unlikely to happen, and it did. So I just want to flag and have it noted. I'm just nervous about the removal of all the criteria, even if it may not happen. I'm nervous about removing all those criteria. Someone else can bring back in a completely different way, and I might not be here, others might not be here, and again, you know, I take the responsibilities, like we all do, seriously, of my time in the room. So I'm noting, I want it noted that I am concerned that all those criteria are missing from this strategy. If that goes to Cabinet on Thursday as a footnote, that's fine. I just want to flag it that I'm concerned. In coming back on the points that Mr. Henry's just raised, I note that obviously the sections and the strategic criteria for the enterprise zone and the bid town deal are both new this year in this document, and they reflect things we have decided at various times, and I note the ease with which we might start to look at these projects as regeneration because they generate a yield. So it was kind of my next comment, because I was slightly concerned on the Loughborough Enterprise Hub that there was doubt at the end of the 3 years about the realization of what that was to be. I hadn't realized that when we passed that and accepted the purchase of that building. I hadn't realized that the 3-year decision point of that centre continuing or generating a capital receipt had not yet been decided. And I just wondered if you could put clarity on that.
Apologies, Councillor Parsons. Are we referring to the Career and Enterprise Zone? Or
yes, the Career and Enterprise Hub. Yep.
Oh, Careers and Enterprise Hub. Sorry, yes. So in effect, a couple things to note on that. The original purchase of that was funded with town deal advance funds. So that was not our own capital that was actually spent on that.
Aware of that.
Something else being spent on that. In order to facilitate that partnership and deliver that for the college, to give them a period of reduced risk, we have agreed that we will enter into a lease where they will be obligated to pay rent after initial 3-year rent-free period. And also during that 3-year occupation, they will be liable for rates, all operating costs. So there is no financial liability on the council whatsoever. At the end of that 3-year period, they can either continue at a market rate, still continuing to pay all the occupation costs, or they can break the lease at that point, at which point we would re-let it and it would fall into ours. Now it's being converted from a retail facility to a more office-based facility and a smaller office-based facility. You'll also note that we're going through an accommodation review at the moment, trying to look at better ways to more effectively use the estate, which is probably going to, in all actuality, take 3 to 5 years to fully deliver, because property doesn't move that quick when trying to move 500 souls. So from that perspective, there are still options on it. We will have a legal agreement around that. It's not coming out of our own capital or revenue at this particular point, and it's totally funded by that government advanced town funding grant.
I think it was just the point I noted the phrase capital receipt, which kind of indicates that one plan might be a 3-year sale point. That was all the point I was making. I hadn't realised that we would consider potentially realising it as a capital receipt in 3 years' time.
I suppose at this particular point, Councillor Parsons, we have to keep all of our options open and note them at this particular point. The intention is not to sell it in 3 years' time, but we don't know what will happen in 3 years.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. I'm good on the first part of the document, so I'm happy to shut up now and as anyone moves to questions on the Treasury management piece. Thank you.
Thank you. I just had one small question for Simon. I take these restrictions on investing in commercial property that are being consulted on at the moment are as a result of some councils taking out substantial investments in commercial property. Is this the correct interpretation?
Yes, I would say so. So both SIPFA and the Treasury or the government basically want to. So the PWLB announcement was to make it more difficult for councils. What they're doing with this consultation, it would appear, is essentially stopping it. So as Justin said, so there is a distinction around regeneration and investment property, which is maybe a slightly grey area, but to qualify under the new regime, as I understand it, anything it would have to have a regeneration or other policy objective as well as yield, and certainly anything that was purchased outside the borough, I think it would be very, very difficult to justify anything of a sort of regeneration nature. So, and obviously, given the mix of our commercial property, which I say we might have a look a little bit at later, but that would have precluded all bar one of our commercial investment properties, and the other one would have been extremely debatable. I'll put it like that. Had we tried to get that one through.
Does Councillor Baldwin have a question? You're muted.
Yes. No, I'm not anymore. Thanks, Chair.
Okay.
We made resources available and recruited a raft of solicitors and allied technical staff to deal with commercialisation. Now that it's being cut back, are all those staff going to be needed, or is there going to be a review taking place as to whether they're all going to be needed or whether they should be changed in any way?
We did appoint solicitors, but they were just for legal advice, so they weren't permanent staff. So there is the person who's been brought in to help us with our commercialisation, but lots of other things as well, is Justin. So actually, it's only Justin's come in with that background to help lead on commercialisation, but also the development of our assets and procurement and a number of other things like that. So in reality, Justin's the only person. All the various consultants and legal and professional advice we have, they were just appointed as ad hoc legal professional advice. So we certainly don't have any of those. They were never, and are certainly not now, on the council's payroll.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Parsons, I see your hand still up. Do you have any further questions?
Not on the first part of the report, Chair. Just I'm waiting to see if others have questions on the Treasury strategy part.
Are there any further questions from members? No. So you've got a further question, Councillor Parsons?
Just one or two small points. On page 54, which we're now obviously into the Treasury management strategy as the second part of the document. We, on the first table of capital expenditure, we note that the budget for 2021 was 66.5 million, and the actual spend as of year end 2020 was only 30 million. And I recognise that significant carryovers, probably around enterprise zone regeneration, etc. Do we have an idea of what that's likely to be in terms of the actual spend by year end? As we're getting closer, do we have a sense of what that's likely to be?
I think in terms of the commercialisation, the 22.7 is pretty much the final figure on that one. I think there is going to be some enterprise zone expenditure. Simon can correct me if that's the case. There is going to be some enterprise zone expenditure against that 15 million by year end. That is a snapshot as at the 31st of December, as you can see. I do envisage that the fleet will be fully spent, which is within the general fund expenditure. So I think against that general fund expenditure of 12.5 million, I do believe that that will go up slightly, but as you can imagine with COVID, that quite a lot of the schemes, especially on HRA, that we've not been able to get access to some of the properties to actually do things like kitchens and bathrooms and that sorts of thing. So I presume there will be some slippage, some carryover of these schemes.
Yeah, so basically where we are, I don't think there'll be any expenditure out of the 15 million on regeneration. On the enterprise zone forward funding, there's almost certainly, well, we should have done it by now actually, but there's a last minute glitch between the local enterprise partnership and the site sponsor around the new meaning of state aid, because the rules are obviously literally just been changed. So the solicitors are wrangling over that, but other than that, that's all agreed. So I'd still be pretty confident we'll be forward funding to the tune of £2 million by the year end. But that will be £28 million within that total. That highly exceptionally unlikely that we would spend that by the year end. I think virtually no chance. And then, as Leslie describes, the rest of it is a question of progress against the more usual or standard capital program, which obviously with COVID and particularly on our housing stock is more difficult at the moment.
Thank you. Second question then, the next table, which on my notes is also on page 54. Last year, we entitled the line, which I think probably is the same line. Last year it was just revenue contributions. This year the line is entitled HRA revenue contributions. And the HRA revenue contributions for 2021, 21, 22 and 22, 23 are very significantly higher than we were predicting last year. How is it, and presuming it is the same line and it is all the same component pieces, what's constituting that significant increase in the HRA revenue contributions to the capital financing? So if I say last year, the revenue contribution for 2021 was estimated at 4 million, it's in this year at 8.2. In 21-22, it was 3.7 million, it's now in at 6.9. For 22-23, it was 4 million last year, it's now in at 7.2. I'm confused as to how the HRA revenue line has nearly doubled, and I don't understand why.
I can get you a breakdown of that figure, Councillor Parsons. I think in terms of HRA contributions, that's generally made up of the depreciation element comes into here as financing, and then there's also a revenue contribution to capital. They're normally about 3 million each element, but I'd certainly have to check whether that is all HRA. Looking at that table, it would appear to be the case, but I would have to double check that with my
I'm just concerned in the current climate why it would double. Effectively, each of those 3 years has doubled in value. I mean, if I just do a quick totting up, over the 3 years, 20 to 23, we were predicting just over 11 million. We're now saying it's going to contribute 22, 23 million. I mean, that's a substantive change.
Yeah, I think with HRA, we don't have carryovers like we do on the general fund. So in general fund, we set the scheme for 3 years, and then, like we've just said earlier, we will actually be carrying forward underspends if the officer feels that he can actually put that scheme in place for next year. In terms of the HRA, they do get replaced. The schemes get replaced year on year, but I can check that information out.
I just need some explanation.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, Mrs. Tansey. I appreciate that. I just need explanation.
Yeah.
It's a substantive change to last year's estimates, and I don't really understand how the HRA account can all of a sudden be delivering double to us in terms of the financing of the capital expenditure. I don't understand that, how in the space of this year it's now going to contribute double effectively per year for the next 3 years. So I just need to understand that. I think we all probably do.
I mean, just one comment. Looking at the HRA budget above, it's 8.9 million, and then 21-22 it's 7 million and another 7 million. So I think the budget that's set, you know, is in line with those funding figures at the bottom, because HRA is, as I say, isolated in only to 2 areas of funding. But I can certainly come back to you on that one.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Does anyone else have any?
I think that's me on those. Thank you very much, Chair.
I don't see any other hands raised at the moment, but does anybody else have anything they wish to ask? I'll move on to the recommendations. I think I need your advice on this, Ed. The report, the way it's framed, is a report from Cabinet to Council, and I presume that's what the recommendations in the report are designed for. So what do we ask to approve on this report, please?
Let me just check, sorry. Let me just check the report. So the strategy is set out in Appendix A. So I think I might need to defer to Simon Jackson at this point, because so I think it depends on whether those present are happy for it to go to Cabinet and Council. Is that right, Simon?
I think the choices of the committee would be that you could note the report, in which case as part of the presentation to Cabinet on Thursday, we'll say that the report's been noted. You can agree some wording that you would like to draw Council's attention to, so you will need to come up with that wording and vote on it and agree it, and you can draw to Council's attention. Or you could do something similar if you wish to draw something to the attention of Cabinet, which I think is what Councillor Parsons was suggesting. So that concern, and I've struggled to come up with to articulate some precise wording, was around the complete removal of the parameters relating to commercial property investment, and a concern that should we recommence commercial property investment, that those parameters may end up being amended as a revised process was agreed. So I think, strictly speaking, that you would probably have to vote as a committee and agree that that's a concern and some wording to be put before Cabinet.
Councillor Parsons, do you want to come up with some form of words that we could put to the vote?
I just wish to note that I am just uncomfortable with the removal of all the criteria in last year's commercial investment strategy, commercial property investment strategy, and that the criteria, the measurement criteria have all disappeared. So that would be whatever the crux of that note to be. I just want to note that to Cabinet, because I think whilst it's highly unlikely in future that we may be able to invest in commercial property, we did have a strategy, we did have criteria that was set, measurement criteria. We had to say yield 7%, 3.5% return. We had created a framework by which to manage our commercial investments, which the criteria to measure that have now gone. And some of the other things that go with it, for example, the constitutional changes on page 97 and other bits still refer to our property purchasing, and I realise the nuances of moving things across the boundary into the enterprise and regeneration area. But I just want to note to Cabinet, I'm uncomfortable with the removal of all the measurement criteria, the numeric measurement criteria of commercial investment.
Councillor Taylor, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, can I just check that that was not answered by the officers that said if the council decide or cabinet decide to go back along that route, that it would come through the audit committee again to be looked at. Am I correct, or did I mishear?
That would be certainly my strong assumption, Councillor Taylor, that we would have to revise the capital strategy, and therefore it would need to go through a cabinet, audit committee, council route. So if it was reinstated, then yes, I would fully expect that to happen.
So does that?
Can I just ask?
Does that not clarify the issues that you're concerned about? That it would come back through this committee route for approval and comments before it went ahead? So I'm just
I don't think so. The problem is the text. If you look on page 97, second paragraph of the constitutional changes, the council approves the 3-year capital plan. Funding for commercial property for investment purposes will be explicitly identifiable, and the decision making is all released around that, delegated to leader. And so it needn't come back to us. It would be good and it would be smart and it would be great if it did, and it would be good if everyone had collective memory of the criteria of yield, return, MRP, etc. But if I'm belt and bracing and just being secure with other people's money, I just wish to note it to cabinet.
Putting that all back in, the circumstances might be different if the council decides to bring that the yields, etc., might be all different. So I'd be more content to just put a word that if it was decided to put that back in, that it comes through this route, rather than, you know, sticking to what was originally because the planet might have changed by then. So I'm not comfortable in putting it all back in, but I would just say that if it decides to go down the commercial route again, that we advise cabinet that we would want it to come through this route again where it came originally. And there could be different councillors on here with different views, so I don't want to be stuck with something that's out of date, would be my view. So that would be my preferred option.
I see Justin, you've got your hand raised, then it's Adrian. You're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Angel. Probably a point of clarification. The criteria that were in the capital strategy were around acquisition and not the management thereof. And councillors will also note that the decision records were released after the completion of each purchase, which demonstrated that the net rent criterion were actually met over time and through the life of the lease from that perspective. So from that perspective, if there are any fundamental changes with any of those, they will have to go back for executive level approval. So let's say we have to renegotiate a lease or relet a building, something of that nature. Given the fact that it's in key decision territory, it will be executive level approvals for that, and members will have sight of that. But certainly in terms of the ongoing management and the initial acquisition, all of that was evidenced in the initial reports that have been released to members to outline the fact that those criteria were actually being adhered to.
Thank you. Adrian?
Thank
Adrian.
you.
No.
I think where you are at the moment is you have one member of the committee who has a concern, who is suggesting that their individual concern should be referred to cabinet. I think my advice would be that you should act collectively as a committee. So you probably need to find out whether the majority of committee members share that concern. And if they don't, obviously it's then not a concern that the committee would need to resolve to pass on to cabinet, if that makes sense, Chair.
Yeah, it does. Just wanted to clarify, at the moment, Simon, the way the report's written, there is no authority to carry out any further commercialisation at this stage, is there?
Correct.
And it would require further reports.
Yeah, so as Justin refers to, some of the management actions we would still need, because we've obviously got a portfolio that we may need to, although we won't be doing any acquisitions, we may want to dispose of one quite quickly. And also, of course, there may be some regeneration acquisitions which may require a similar route. But the way it is at the moment, any commercial properties for yield, we will not be doing. And to redo that, we would need, again, we need all our ducks in a row in terms of it being in the capital strategy and in the capital plan. And and so we'd need both those things in place. What we're doing now is removing it from the capital strategy, and at the next capital plan amendment report, we will be removing the residual balance from the commercial property line within the capital plan, and taking that out of the plan as well, just so it's very clear, and from an audit and from a regulatory point of view, so it's very clear that that's what we've done.
Thank you. Just picking up on Adrian's point then, are there other members of the committee that wish to go along with Councillor Parsons' concerns or not? One. Don't see any other hands raised. Oh, two. Right, I'll go around each member individually. Councillor Bolton, do you have reservations in line with?
Thank you, Chair. I support the view that Councillor Parsons has put forward.
Councillor Baldwin?
I support Jeff Parsons' view as well.
Councillor Bradshaw?
Yeah, having heard the arguments, I support Jeff as well, Councillor Parsons.
Well, obviously, Councillor Parsons supports Councillor Parsons' views. So finally,
I do. It's not to generate change, Chair. No. I just want to note to Cabinet that we note that that's been removed, and I want Cabinet to know that we note that, and just that's all. I want to change it. Just want to note that we've noted that.
Apologies, I missed out Councillor Charles.
Well, actually, Chair, I think I would be happy that should the council go back into commercialised property for yield, then the criteria should be revisited, which I think is really what Councillor Taylor's saying.
And finally, Councillor Taylor. Yes.
Yeah, what I've already stated, I don't want to tie us to something that's out of date.
Can we put it in a form of a resolution then, and somebody propose it and second?
Chair, I just wish to note that this committee notes the removal of all the measurement criteria and wishes Cabinet to know that we noted that. I'm not asking them to change it. I just want them to know that we noted that. I just want it brought to their attention.
I'm happy to second that.
Right, I'll put it to the vote then.
Through you, Chair, I just wanted to pick up on Councillor Taylor's point. She did make a proposal that you should recommend to Cabinet that if commercial property acquisition came back, that you want it to go through the same route again, that it comes through audit. I don't know whether you...
Chair, can I just make a comment? Thanks, Nikki. I think what I'm saying is the same as Councillor Parsons, but in a stronger way. I think we don't want to just note to Cabinet that it's took out, but I think we should tell them that if they decide to put it back in, that it comes through this note. So I think mine's stronger, to be honest. So I would propose that we tell Cabinet that if they decide to put commercialisation back on the capital plan, that it comes through this route again where it came through previously.
Councillor Parsons, what are your views on that?
In truth, Chair, I would have to remember the exact route by which it all came through, and I'm not on it to remember the route that all of those decisions came through, because it's generally circuitous. I know there was a huge debacle over the scrutinisation of aspects and where that sat, and I cannot remember, if I'm truthful, the exact route by which those decisions arrived with us. So I agree with the intent. I just want Cabinet to note that those criteria, as far as we are concerned at the moment, those measurement criteria, we note that they are absent from this paper. Coming back through the same route, I understand what Councillor Taylor is saying, and I'm comfortable with it if I completely understood the route by which it had come, and that this committee had foresight and was able to implement, but I cannot remember the exact route by which that decision arrives with us. When Cabinet decide that's what they want to do.
Councillor Bolton, you seconded it. What are your views?
I do agree with Councillor Parsons, and I'm not sure the route through which the decision to the audit committee. And I think at the time, both Councillor Parsons and I were on scrutiny commission, so it may have come through that, and I really don't know the answer. But I don't see any harm in doing what Councillor Parsons has said. We could note it and ask that if it's reinstated in any way, that it comes through audit committee. Does that not give us the best of?
Yeah, I think it does.
Both points.
Nikki and Ed, are you happy with that?
I'm happy with that, Chair. I would also like to quickly note, Chair, that Justin Henry's put in the chat that the route through which it came. So it was audit committee, scrutiny, cabinet, and then council. So if that clarifies anything, yeah.
I think scrutiny was. I think scrutiny have the opportunity to look at, but the rules of this are that the audit committee at the moment, based on the financial regulations, which I think is the underpinning regulation at the moment, the audit committee have to have a look at any changes to the capital strategy before it goes to council. So it would become audit committee and then council, and then as a matter of natural course, it would go to cabinet as well. So to not bring it here would require a change in the constitution. So obviously that's perfectly possible, but for the capital strategy or alterations there to not to come to audit committee would require a change in the constitution, which would have to be taken through council. And I think naturally it would come through here. I mean, I think I would take Councillor Parsons' point that some of you members might not be here, officers might not be here as well, and as Councillor Taylor's point that things like appropriate yield in 5, 10 years time might be quite a different number to what seems reasonable at the moment. But from an office point of view, that's the intention. That's how I would envisage it working. So I'm perfectly comfortable with that to be reiterated to cabinet.
I think if I can highlight it, Mr. Jackson, just in terms of where I sit. So this year is the first year that we've had the strategy published in this document for the enterprise zone and the regeneration of the town deal. But effectively in those criteria appearing in here, that's the first time they've appeared in this document in here. But effectively all those decisions have been made before that arrives into this document. That's my point really, I guess. This is the first time that the town bid has appeared in the Treasury strategy. Effectively, all those decisions have been made and done, and we're just ticking the box around that town bid strategy that's appeared inside here now for the first time in the Treasury strategy. And that's my concern, that we lose that process, and what comes back to us by the time it arrives in a document for us is a done deal. Whereas at least we would have those criteria to fall back on. Even if it's just the headings and we negotiate around the levels, we would have that criteria and that framework to argue against.
So just to be clear, what are we asking committee to agree? Express our concerns over the...
I guess all I'm asking is cabinet to note that we note the removal of all the measurement criteria around commercial investment property. And if we add on the additional piece from Councillor Taylor that it comes back through the same route, it may add an extra defence and may facilitate us having that opportunity. But I just highlight that were those same words a year ago about the town deal. The town deal, this is the first time the town deal strategy piece has appeared inside the Treasury strategy, appeared inside the capital plan, and yet it's effectively a done deal. And I would be worried that it would be a done deal next time it comes to us in the Treasury documents in audit, and we'd have nothing to refer back to say, well, hang on a minute, guys, we actually still had a set of criteria around this, and now we're doing wild. I'm not saying that we would have caught, but who knows who's in the seat in a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time. And it's just about creating protection for us and our residents. So I just want to note it to council. That's all I want to do.
Well, I will second that proposal, Chair.
Okay. Then I'll put it to the vote then. Obviously you're in favour of it, so I'll ask Councillor Baldwin, are you content to support the recommendation?
I am content to support the recommendation.
Councillor Bradshaw?
Just a sec, Chair. There's a note appeared from Adrian in the chat. Is that important before we vote on this?
I'm struggling slightly, Chair, as to what the reason would be for the committee to ask Cabinet to note that the committee has noted something.
I think the concern was that if it was reinstated, then it needs to come back through this route, doesn't it? I think that was what the concern is about, isn't it, Councillor Parsons?
But why are you asking Cabinet to note that something?
Cabinet's on Thursday before it goes to full council, and Cabinet might choose to note what we've said and change it.
So the reason is to allow Cabinet to consider whether they wish to change the word, although the Audit Committee does not believe it needs to be changed.
I'm asking Cabinet to note that we've done that, and Cabinet might wish to consider it.
Can I just, I think the point of us is to make recommendations to Cabinet, as far as I'm aware, isn't it, on going forward? So my recommendation is to Cabinet that if they choose to decide to put capital strategy back into use, that it comes back through the old route, and that would be my recommendation to Cabinet.
What are your views, Councillor
You now have
Parsons?
two slightly different proposals. The committee needs to decide which one of the two proposals they're going to run with, and I would still advise that you need to come up with a reason.
I think the reason is we're concerned that the proposals have been removed, but we're bothered that it could get reinstated and we not get involved in approving it. It just happens by sleight of hand.
Simon said the Constitution would require it to come back through yourselves anyway. Councillor Parsons?
My view remains the same, Chair. I think we have the right just to tell Council we note that, to tell Cabinet we note it, and leave it up to Cabinet to decide. And I am happy to note that those criteria have been removed. For me personally, irrespective of other members, it's a concern to me that we have all of that and then we choose to remove it this time. At the same time, we see new criteria for the first time on things like the town bid and the enterprise zone, which we had not seen within this document before. And effectively, all of the things contained are effectively a done deal inside those strategic boxes. If I just talk about the physical presentation of them inside those boxes, I don't want that to come back again on commercial property. If we choose to borrow money or we find a route to do that outside of using it for regeneration or enterprise zone.
Right. Adrian, does that?
Just to say really that it's quite obvious that the committee have got some strong views about what they want to make a recommendation to Cabinet, and I think as a chair you need to decide whether you wish to go down that route, because there's obviously a proposal on the table.
Well, I still think the way forward is to note our concerns to Cabinet so they're aware we've raised them and put down a marker in the sand.
I think that's, from listening to what you're saying, as a committee, that is shared by other members of the committee.
Chair, I think it's for a proposer to come up with the wording and then for the committee to vote on the wording that the proposer is proposing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we're back to Councillor Parsons.
Making up amendments on the hoof. I wish Cabinet to note that we are uncomfortable with the removal of the of the measurement criteria of the commercial property strategy from this new treasury strategy, new capital strategy, in the overall capital strategy that we're talking about this.
And I will second that.
So I just ask Adrian and Nikki, are they content for that to be put? That's a workable solution.
Sounds fine to me, Chair. Thank you.
Well, I'll put it to the vote then in that case. We'll start again. Councillor Baldwin.
I'm happy to support the proposal.
Councillor Bradshaw.
You, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to support that proposal.
Councillor Charles.
Yeah, happy to support it, Chair.
Councillor Parsons, obviously, and Councillor Taylor.
I won't vote, Chair. I'll just go with majority.
In that case, it's carried. Are there any other recommendations from this, or is it sufficient that we note the rest of it, Nikki or Ed?
So I think there was a typo that was picked up, which would be just like a note for Simon in the report.
Yeah, I will see if I can remember to ask Cabinet to amend it before it goes on to council. I'll need to check with Nikki whether I'm allowed to do that, but yeah, we're just trying and correct that before a final version goes to council.
Thank you. And I think the rest is that you're noting the report to go to the recommendations to go to Cabinet, as well as the the other one that you've made. So yeah. I think you've probably covered it.
Can I just make a point to Mr. Jackson? On page 97, given what you've said about the having commercial property reference, we quite clearly state on page 97, periodically the council will invest in commercial property for the purposes of making a financial return. And we're recommending that change in Appendix C. And you've commented that we've tried to remove it earlier on in the main body of the document. So I'm just really flagging that, whether you've got anything else you need to change in the appendix, really.
Right. Okay, sorry, I haven't, it's in Appendix C, is it?
Appendix C, sorry. Page 97 on our papers, we explicitly talk about constitutional changes around the financial regulators of the Constitution, in turn, we specifically talk about commercial property for financial return.
Sorry, which page 97 are we referring to?
Sorry.
Sorry,
Chair.
I was getting confused.
Sorry, Chair. Ignore my comment. Ignore my comment.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair. Ignore it. Sorry, Chair.
So I think we've dispensed with this item now, haven't we? Yeah. So in that case, we'll move on to item 7, which is the internal audit progress report. Would Lisa like to take us through the report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this progress report takes us up to the 31st of January. I'll just quickly run through some of the key points to note from the report. We are still continuing to make good progress against the audit plan at Appendix A on page 95. So we're still on track to be at least 75% complete by the 31st of March, and anticipating 100% by the time I'm writing my annual opinion, which will feed into the annual governance statement. 2 final audit reports have been issued since the last progress report to committee in December. Right to buy audit was issued with reasonable assurance and payroll with substantial. There aren't any significant weaknesses from the audits that I need to bring to your attention at this time. However, you do have the executive summaries included at Appendix B for your information. Since the last committee, there's been good progress by the Housing Service in progressing the overdue recommendations that have previously been reported. All of the overdue recommendations that are included at Appendix C, that remain in Appendix C, are at a reasonable stage and are in progress, and we do expect them to be concluded fairly soon. Therefore, I don't have any significant concerns to raise at this time. I'm happy to take any questions that committee have on the progress report.
Do any members have any questions to raise to Lisa? I don't see any hands raised at the moment. Can I take that to mean that there aren't any? In which case, I'll just move on to the recommendation, which is that we note the progress as set out in Appendix 1 of the report. I'll go through members one by one. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to note the report.
Councillor Baldwin.
I'm happy to note the report, Chair.
Councillor Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to note the progress report. Thank you.
Councillor Charles.
Thanks, Chair. Happy to note the report.
Councillor Parsons.
Happy to note, Chair.
And Councillor Taylor.
Happy to note, Chair.
In that case, we'll move on to item 8, which is the internal audit plan, which I think was circulated separately.
Just to clarify, Chair, the covering report was circulated separately, but the rest of the body of the plan is in the main.
Right, okay, yeah, I've got that now. So Lisa, back to you again. Do you want to take us through this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this report is the proposed audit plan for 2021-22. I've prepared the plan based on an organisational wide control risk assessment and taking into account views of senior management. The approach is set out on pages 107 and 108 of the plan report document. Just to flag up the audits that were removed from the original current year's plan, that when we had to revise it due to the impact of COVID earlier in the year, those have been revisited with heads of service and SLT, and where appropriate, so where the risk remains and where our audit work would add value, they have now been brought forward into the 21-22 plan. A summary of the audit plan is set out on page 109, and the detailed plan is included at Appendix A on page 111. Should be noted that timings and audit days in the plan are indicative at this point in time. They're likely to change as we move through the year and individual audits are formally scoped, so just to flag that up. It's also important to recognise at this time that in line with the public sector internal audit standards, the audit plan does need to be flexible and able to respond to changing risks as we move through the year. So audit committees should expect to see that audits are added and removed to the audit plan throughout the year. Just a few key points to highlight. There is some time included in the plan for COVID related assurance work. So as a minimum, I'd expect that to involve some further assurance work that central government will require us to do on the current round of business grants that are being administered. However, there may be some additional requirements from central government that have not yet been specified at this time. So consider it prudent to have some time in the plan should we need it. In terms of the key financial systems audits, as you know, we revisited the 2021 plan and that was reprioritised to audit all of the key financials in full. So I don't expect to be undertaking as much work on the key financials next year unless there are changes in systems, processes or staff that would change the risk environment. But there is time allocated to allow us to do that work. The results from the NFI mandatory exercise are due over the next couple of months, so there's some time allocated for that work. You'll also see some advisory time allocated to the services, workplace and people programme, because that's obviously a significant piece of work that Charnwood will be going through. There is a small contingency of 16 days that's been possible. Should a large investigation arise that requires significant audit resources, we'll have to review the plan, consider whether reprioritisation is required if that contingency isn't sufficient. But we do have also the potential of other resources from the shared service partners if they have capacity. So although it is only a small contingency, we do have other options. In terms of the ICT audits, 21-22 is the final year of contract with BDO to deliver these specialist audits. Those that are set out in the plan are as were agreed in June 2020, but I do plan to revisit those in Q1 just to make sure that they remain the most appropriate and give us the best value in terms of those outsourced audits, both in terms of giving us assurance around the current risks and adding value as well. I'm happy to take any questions that the committee may have on the plan.
Thank you, Lisa. Don't see any hands raised at the moment. Do I take that to mean that there are no questions of Lisa at this stage? I think I can take it as that. The recommendation of the report is that we approve the proposed audit plan as set out in the appendix. I guess, as you said, Lisa, that if things arise, then you'll come back with amendments to it and we'll be kept updated on that, won't we?
Yeah, the committee will continue to be kept up to date with the progress report. The future plan will then come forward in those progress reports to every committee.
Because we don't know how long the current situation is going to last, do we, or what lies around the corner? So
no, and we've tried to reflect that whilst also making sure that we do deliver audits in those high risk areas as well. But making sure that we've got that time to reflect that.
Yeah. Sorry, I just noticed Councillor Parsons' question.
Thank you, Chair. It's only to ask, is your budget set for the year ahead? And if we're obviously with COVID, with the high risk in terms of everything going on, it's 16 days contingency, but presumably that contingency exists in other councils because this is a shared service. So we might end up needing none and someone else could need 32. So that's part of the flexibility built into the system. But if something comes in from external government, does something else have to give, or do you have the ability to go back to all of us in the shared service and say, look, we are going to need a bit more funding here because we're getting this external pressure? Or is it a case of if something comes in, we have to lose something else?
Potentially a bit of both. It depends on the circumstances. It may be that there's scope to revisit the plan. Depends where we're at the point in year when something arises. It may be that some of the things are able to come off the plan without causing too many problems because things have changed or this is a higher priority piece of work. If I think that we still need to do those and we don't have the resources to do the additional pressure as well, then that's something that I would flag up with Adrian and Simon to discuss how we go about making sure we get the necessary resources. It isn't that we just have to work within what we've got per se, that there could be a decision to look at that depending on the nature of the issue. So it does just depend on the nature of the issue. We, as you say, we do have that flexibility. There is contingency built into the other partners' audit plans. Depending at the time of year, they might have a lot of capacity in Q1, which we can then benefit and give them back. So there's potential movement, but it just depends when those issues come up, to be honest, and what the issue is.
You satisfied, Councillor Parsons?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Don't see any other hands raised at the moment, so I'll put the recommendation to the committee, which is that we approve the proposed audit plan. Councillor Bolton?
Happy to approve the plan, Chair.
Councillor Baldwin?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to approve the plan.
Councillor Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Also happy to approve the plan.
Councillor Charles.
Happy to approve, Chair.
Councillor Parsons.
Yes, happy to support, Chair.
And finally, Councillor Taylor.
Happy to support.
Then we'll move on to item 9 on the agenda, which is the external quality assessment of internal audit, which is your report, Lisa. Would you like to introduce it?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I promise this is my last report for the evening. You were given a brief overview of the outcome of our assessment at the December committee. However, due to the reporting deadlines, we weren't in a position to share the final report and action plan at that time. I'll just quickly run through. The outcome of the assessment was positive, and the assessor found that we do conform to the internal audit standards. There were only 2 minor recommendations made formally in the final report. And the assessor did also make some informal suggestions to me during the assessment. And as I consider those to still be valuable and support our continuous improvement as an audit team, I have incorporated those into our action plan as well. You'll see the full final report is included at Appendix 1 and our action plan is at Appendix 2. And again, if the committee have any questions, I'm happy to take those.
I'm not seeing any hands raised. Can I just ask you, Lisa, this went across all 3 councils that are participating. And so as far as the assessment concerned, it applies to all of us.
Yes.
Not just Charnwood uniquely.
Yeah, so we follow, so as you'll recall, when Charnwood joined the shared service at the start of the year, we did a lot of work to align all of our processes and all of our documents. And part of that was knowing that we had that assessment coming up so that that view could be taken across all partners. As part of the assessment, she did speak to key officers from each service and chair of each audit committee. She selected the people that she wanted to interview as part of the assessment. So yes, it does apply across all partners.
Because she's identified all the people that she interviewed in the report, hasn't she?
Yeah, yeah, that's on the final page of her report.
In that case, I'll put it to the where the recommendations, we note the findings from the assessment report and the associated action plan. So I'll go through a roll call. Councillor Bolton.
Happy to note the report, Chair.
Councillor Baldwin.
Happy to note the report, Chair.
Councillor Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to note the report.
Councillor Charles.
Thanks, Chair. Happy to note the report.
Councillor Parsons.
Yes, happy to note, Chair.
And Councillor Taylor.
Happy to note, Chair.
Then we'll move on to item 10, which is the work programme. Is there anything you'd like to say, Ed?
It's mostly for the committee to note, make any suggestions to anything they may wish to move or add, or yeah. Does anyone have anything to comment on it?
I'm looking for hands being raised, and just at the moment I don't see any.
Just one comment, Chair, if I may. We said earlier on that we are recognising from, I think, the reports earlier that audit may not, the end of year audit report may get pushed back, or the legislation next year and the year after is back to September. Does that coincide with the work plan, or have we still got it in July?
I'm not sure, actually.
Your July meeting is your accounts meeting at the moment.
Yeah.
So the work programme at the moment is based on what we're expecting an ordinary year to look like.
And we've got the opportunity. It's got the opportunity to amend it at a later stage anyway. So these
That's
things
fine,
are
Chair. I
not-
was just noting that just in case
Okay.
we needed to make the change and move it to September in line with.
So I think at this stage we just need to note the report, the work programme as it is, and that we'll make amendments as and when required in the future. Is that sufficient?
Yes, yes, yes. That's just so you can note the report.
Okay, I'll put that to the vote then. Councillor Bolton.
Yes, happy with that, Chair.
Councillor Baldwin.
I'm happy with the work programme, Chair.
Councillor Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to note the work programme. Thank you.
Councillor Charles.
Yeah, happy to note the programme, Chair.
Councillor Parsons.
Yes, happy to note, Chair.
And Councillor Taylor.
Happy to note, Chair.
Right, we're going to come to an item now where I'm going to ask that members of the public be excluded from the meeting for the consideration of an item on the investment performance report. And this is on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest of disclosing the information. The information in the report refers to the identity of the council's investment property tenants and the council's financial affairs. So I'll put that to the vote. Councillor Bolton?
What am I voting on? Am I voting to agree?
We're voting to exclude the press and the public from the meeting.
I agree with that. Thank you.
Councillor Baldwin?
Yes, I agree, Chair.
Councillor Bradshaw?
Yes, Chair, I agree with the recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Charles?
Yes, in agreement with the exclusion.
Councillor Parsons?
Yes, happy with that, Chair.
And Councillor Taylor?
Agree, Chair.